Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Bitcoin, and we're going to be providing an update to the bull market support band. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and also check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. Link for the sale is in the description below and the pinned comment. Let's go and jump in. So, we have had a bit of a development this week. And there's actually a couple of important things that I think are going to want to watch over the next several days and the next, say, 2 to 3 weeks or so. So, Bitcoin did just have its first weekly close below the bull market support band in 2024. In fact, the last time we had a close below both the 20-week SMA and 21-week EMA was all the way back over here in October of 2023. So it's actually been quite some time since we saw this play out. So it is at least noticeable, right? I mean, like, and this is something we talked about beforehand, right? We said back in March that you could have a scenario where Bitcoin tops a month before the halving. It gets a local top before a month before the halving, just like ETH USD had a local top 1 month before the merge. And then it just sets a few lower highs and you get a summer lull. And now that seems to be what has happened. Now, remember just a few weeks ago, when we were up at 71K, there was a lot of bullish sentiment. And now, I mean, a lot of that's just been completely wiped out here. But I will say, at this point, there is still something to watch here in the short term. Because while we do have a weekly close below the bull market support band, there are cases where you go below it and then you get back above it the following week, and it's sort of just like a fake out, right? So I think it would still be premature to assume that it can't get back above it, especially when you look at other examples where it actually had a very similar pattern. So I do want to talk a little bit about that. Obviously, we've made the comparisons to 2019, basically, where Bitcoin sort of topped out in the summer of 2019 and then basically set these lower highs, eventually fell below the bull market support band, and then struggled to get back above it for the rest of the year. So, look, guys, we know that that's one outcome, okay? And, if you've watched this channel at all for the last year or so, you know that that is one potential outcome, sort of an intermediate downtrend in the market right around the time that rate cuts arrive. A counterpoint to that idea, though, is that when 2019 happened, Bitcoin did rally and get a final top 1 month before rate cuts. So I don't really know if that's going to happen, but so far structurally, it still looks similar to 2019 in the sense that you are getting lower highs and lower lows, right? If you look at this, you can see Bitcoin got a series of lower lows and also got a series of lower highs. Now you can see a very similar thing over here, right? Where it's getting a series of lower highs and a series of lower lows. So structurally, it still looks similar to 2019. However, there are some things that I think are worth considering. And that is perhaps best looked at when you pull up the 200-day moving average. If you pull up the 200-day moving average, it's currently sitting at right around 58,759. So, a few $1,000s higher than the current price. I need to sneeze, but we'll see when it happens. But a few $1,000s above the current price. The recent low that Bitcoin set was on July 5th. What's interesting is in 2013, Bitcoin sort of topped out in April, and then it sort of bled until July 5th, right? July 5th actually marked the low. And you can see that it wicked up the day of April 10th, right? You see that? On April 10th, there was a wick up, new high. July 5th was a low. And then slowly it got right back above the 200-day SMA on July 7th, which would have been, this last day, which Bitcoin was unable to do. But it only spent, a couple of days or so below the 200-day moving average, and then it got right back above it, and then it basically took out this lower high trend line that Bitcoin had been following for a while, right? You see that, and it took it out by late July, early August. So That's one thing to consider because there is some type of negative seasonality going into the summer. That's why we call it a summer lull, right? And this happened last year as well. Look at 2023. You also had a summer lull, right, where the market just sort of died off in the summer months. It also did it over here as well. Look at 2021, right? You can see a summer lull where the market bottomed out mid-July or so. Look at 2016, where the market had a summer lull and it bottomed out basically the very first part of August. In fact, if you were to go look at the year-to-date ROI of Bitcoin, here's 2024. Here's 2013, right? You can see there was negative seasonality going into that July timeframe. Look at 2021, right? Same thing. Not so great seasonality in the summer months. Look at 2017, same thing, right? You can see how Bitcoin sort of falls off in those summer months. And that's one of the reasons why we talked a lot about the idea of a summer lull, right? Where you see this drop in the market and as basically sentiment dies off. And one of the things we talked about is that all Bitcoin pairs should start to show a lot of weakness in the summer as the social risk drops. And you can see that the social risk has dropped back back into the 0 to 0.1 risk band. And we saw back over here when that happened, that's where alt Bitcoin pairs finally faded. And again, if you need a reminder on that, if you were to go look over at alt Bitcoin pairs, right here, you can see that in the same way they are, in the same way that 2019 was, they are sort of flirting with that support level where they're really struggling to hold right now. So look, there's evidence to support the idea that it's following the 2019 path, right? You saw gold break out, and that's what marked the local top for Bitcoin. And you also, of course, have this trend line tag of USDT dominance, right? Where it tags the trend line, and every single time it tags the trend line, it then goes up for a while. We've seen that happen many, many times, which is obviously not great for risk assets in the cryptoverse. So that is something to consider, right? We know that 2019 is a possible outcome. But what if Bitcoin gets back above its 200-day SMA or the bull market support band? If that happens, then it could mean that it's not like 2019. Again, I don't control what it is. It just is what it is. And back over here in 2023, we saw Bitcoin go below the 200-day SMA, and then it reclaimed it in October. You see that? It reclaimed it in October. So in 2019, you can see that it also reclaimed it in October, but it was a fake out that was met with a lower high. You see? It was a fake out above the 200-day SMA that just ended up being a lower high. So back over here, Bitcoin was able to break through. In 2019, it was not. And it didn't break through until the following year. Okay? Now, the reason it fell down right around the time of rate cuts. And there's a good chance that rate cuts are going to be coming later on this year. So I want to be open-minded about this. I'm just trying to be honest. I want to be open-minded. I have a bias, obviously, to assume 2019. And I think a lot of that is because of what happened last cycle. But I also know that every cycle is different. And so we should not assume that it's going to play out in the exact same way as 2019. I think there's evidence to support that view. But if we were to go find evidence to sort of counteract that view, you could go again, look, and you could find bad seasonality by Bitcoin in the summer months. That happened in 2013, it happened in 2016, and in 2017, and 2021. It even happened in 2023. So this is something that was theoretically always going to happen, right? Regardless of what happens in Q4, there was theoretically going to be, there's no such thing as a sure thing, right? But based on seasonality, it was pretty likely that we were going to see a summer lull in the summer of 2024. And that's regardless of what ends up happening in Q4 of this year. Okay? So you can see that in 2013, in Q4, what happened? We basically fell below the 200-day SMA in July 5th, which is exactly when Bitcoin found this low. It was also July 5th, coincidentally, right? But remember, back in 2013, Bitcoin got back above its 200-day SMA yesterday on July 7th, whereas it still hasn't been able to do that so far. So something to keep an eye on. It's a little bit different. Also in 2013, Bitcoin topped in April. 2024, Bitcoin, its local top was in March. But I would say this. Okay, if Bitcoin can get back above its 200-day SMA, and let's say like the bull market support band, right? If it can get back above it by mid-July, then there's evidence to support that, hey, maybe you still have enough juice in the tank for another move up in Q4, kind of like you saw in 2013, kind of like you saw here in 2016, where we went below the bull market support band. We also went below the 200-day SMA, but then we still got back into gear. And then Q4 came around and we saw Bitcoin go up once again, right? So that is still a possibility that is worth considering. The main difference, though, between between what we're seeing now and throughout all those other prior cycles that I sometimes wonder about is that, and again, I don't really, I'm not using this to say this time is different. In fact, so far this time has been very much the same. In fact, if you were to look at, if you were to just simply look at the sort of the market cycle ROI, right? If you were to look at, ROI from the low, right? If we go from like ROI after the cycle bottom ROI, I mean, you can see that, look at where Bitcoin is right now and compared to the last couple of cycles. I mean, this is where it's always been at this point in the cycle, right? Right here, right? I mean, and so, when you look at it like that, it doesn't really seem like what's happening now is that big of a deal. Now, if you measure it from the peak and you take peak to peak, we're still well above the last few cycles. But if you measure it from the April 2021 top, we're kind of not. We're kind of right where we should be, right? So in that sense, it's not. I mean, there's a lot of elements of like, it's not like this time is not different in that regard. But there's this other part of me that I look at this stuff and I'm like, well, for all of Bitcoin's history, for basically all of Bitcoin's history, we saw the unemployment rate essentially dropping with the exception of 2020, right? You see that, right? This is just massive downtrend in the unemployment rate. And then you had a spike here, and then Bitcoin obviously dropped. Now you're slowly starting to see Bitcoin rise back up. Or sorry, you're starting to see the unemployment rate go back up, which is not something that Bitcoin has really experienced before. Now, I think Bitcoin can obviously withstand, even if you do get a recession, I think Bitcoin will withstand that and still go on and be successful. But, it's just something to think about, right? I mean, and I think a lot of people look at it and say, well, you're going to have a left translated peak where Bitcoin's going to rally in Q4 and top in, and then you're going to get a multi-year bear market in a recession. That's true. You could see something like that. You could also see something like, where you get a scare or something in the economy later on this year, and it makes people think the cycle is over, and it makes people think that alt season's never going to happen, and then it happens when it always does in the post-halving year. So I don't really know. I mean, I think that I can look at this and see the resemblance to 2019, right? I can. I see the lower highs, I see the lower lows. It looks like there's this downtrend channel that's forming, right? I see that. It also, of course, happened right around the time of late business cycle getting into those rate cuts. We haven't gotten into the rate cuts yet, but we're not that far away. So I sort of see that. But I also think there's some recency bias there. And, we could go back and look at 2013 and see that, we also were putting in lower highs, but we were putting in higher lows, and then we ended up breaking out. So what I would say is, and I've said this for years, right? Even in early 2022, I said, crypto exposure, if you limit it to Bitcoin, it gives you exposure to the upside. It minimizes your downside risk. Whether Bitcoin goes up or down, the Bitcoin dominance should go up, right? And look at altcoins. They just keep selling off for the most part. Sure, there's a few here and there that are doing pretty good. For the most part, altcoins are stuck in traffic on Circle Street, especially on their Bitcoin pairs. So, I don't really know. I mean, honestly, I don't know if Bitcoin's going to get back above its 200-day SMA here or not. But I would say if it gets back above it soon, like really soon, and gets right back above the bull market support band and can break out above this trend line here, then the odds drastically go up of a Q4 rally, right? Similar to 2013 and 2016 and 2017. If, on the other hand, Bitcoin cannot get back above the 200-day SMA, kind of like 2019, right? It does something like this, where it just kind of keeps getting rejected, then you could be in for one of those repeat scenarios where you have sort of an intermediate downtrend in the middle of a larger uptrend, right? You had a larger uptrend here, but you also had a 9-month downtrend in that larger uptrend. So you could see something like that play out again, right? You have a large uptrend. Could you be in sort of an intermediate downtrend within a larger uptrend? That's a possibility. I think the way to sort of get a clue is to, if that's happening, is see, can Bitcoin get back above its 200-day moving average? Can it get back above the bull market support band? Now, right now, the bull market support band ranges from 60,433 to 65,200. So it's actually quite a bit higher than where we currently are. If it's a 2019 copy, then you would essentially expect Bitcoin to kind of stay down here for a little bit, maybe even set some slightly lower lows, and then rally back up to the 20-week SMA maybe in August or something, right? I mean, that's what you would generally expect if it were to play out in a similar fashion. Kind of just do something like that. Down here, bounce back up, get rejected, and then come back down inside a lower low. That's if it's a 2019 style move. Okay? If it's a 2013, 2016, 2017 style move, you would not expect it to spend much more time at these levels, right? I mean, you would expect it to basically get back above the 21-week EMA this week. That's what it did in 2013, and in 2016 it was just a wick down below the 20-week moving average and 21-week EMA. So you would not expect it to spend that much time down here if you're following sort of the 2013, 2016, 2017, 2021 route, which again, that's where we showed that Bitcoin has often had that negative seasonality effect where often it bleeds sort of into parts of July. So I would keep that in mind. Keep that in mind as what might give us insight into what's in store for us in Q4. Okay? If this were to play out like 2019, again, it would mean just basically bleeding slowly until the end of the year. Okay? If it's 2013 or 2016, then you would not expect Bitcoin to spend much more time at these prices. If you were to pull up the RSI, the relative strength index on the 2-week, it's kind of interesting because, let me just pull this up for a second here. It's a little interesting to me because you have this scenario where all these major tops occurred on this trend line, which has already been tagged, in fact, right? You can see that it's already been tagged. But the counterpoint is that the current level that it's at is exactly the same level that it found support at in 2013, right? You see that? It found support at that level in 2013. It also found support near this level in 2016 as well, a number of times. And so I look at where it is now, and I'm like, well, if this is 2013, then Bitcoin can't go much below the current price that it's already gone below, right? Because if it does, then that means it's going below this 2-week RSI of around 55, which once you go below that, oftentimes you then go all the way back down to sort of much lower levels on the weekly RSI, down to 40 or below, right? Again, right now it's at 55. Now, in 2019, you can see that we had a rally all the way up to the oversold or overbought condition, but we did not hold support at that 55, 56 level, and we ended up going all the way back down to the 40s. So I think we're at a very critical juncture right now with Bitcoin. There's a lot of discussion about, whether you're going to get a left translated cycle where you get a Q4 peak in the halving year, or whether it might be a normal cycle, or maybe it's just a cycle where the top's already in. I mean, that's not really a fun topic, but it is something to at least consider, especially when you look at a chart like this. There's only really been one cycle where you tag this trend line more than once, and that was back in 2013. A lot of these other cycles, once you tag the trend line, the cycle was pretty close to being over. But in 2013, it tagged this trend line, came back down, held support right here, and got one more rally. The counterpoint, though, is this was the post-halving year. This is the halving year, okay? Now, this is the dilemma. These prior peaks occurred in the post-halving year, 2013, 2017, and 2021. So if it's a left-translated peak and it goes back up in Q4 of this year, then is it over at the end of this year? Is it just over? Kind of like it was in 2013. It all happened a year sooner. That's one outcome. But I also think to myself, well, if it's not broke, don't fix it, right? I mean, we've had peaks in Q4 of every post-halving year so far. Again, is that going to happen again? Maybe. I mean, you spend a lot of time fighting it, but what happens if it just plays out like it always has? But if that's the case, if it is just another sort of peak in Q4 of 2025 and not 2024, then that means that you can't really have the same extent of a rally this year. Because if you get it this year, I mean, unless you just think Bitcoin, unless you just think it can do it again next year, which again, I guess anything's possible, but I'd say the odds would go down. So one way that it could play out, if it's not a Q4 rally, would be sort of a 2019 style lull in the market where the summer lull extends beyond the summer. In 2019, the summer lull extended beyond the summer and it lasted for the rest of the year. The market then picked back up the following year, right? And then you still got a Q4 rally, but it didn't happen until the following year. You see that? So 2 of the 3 years you had a Q4 rally, but in one of the 3 years you did not have a Q4 rally, right? You had a Q4 drop, and that was when we had rate cuts. And right now the market is expecting rate cuts in September just before Q4, right? So I think one of the things about Bitcoin is it doesn't tend to repeat exactly what it's done in a prior cycle. It's always throwing us a curveball, okay? So I look at this chart. I'm like, okay, well, if it is 2013, it means it holds support here, right? If it's 2013. Could it be? Yeah, because if it does and you get a peak in late 2024, then it would be slightly different from the prior years because then you have a peak in the halving year as opposed to the post-halving year. And so you could say that it's technically different and therefore, might be worth thinking of it as a, slightly different than the prior cycle. But there's another part of me that thinks, well, if it just bounces back up and comes back up here, everyone's going to just be looking at this thing right here. And then it would seem like it's going to be almost too obvious. I don't know. It's one of those things where, like, you can sort of overthink this when really the strategy, the sort of the correct strategy is DCA at risk levels you're comfortable with, and you're probably going to be better off than trying to time this all this crap. But again, just for academic purposes, one way that it could play out, if it's not a Q4 rally, would be that if the market does a sort of a 2019 style bleed after rate cuts, then you could get this scenario where it comes back down here and then gets another move up in 2025, back up to the top of the trend line. One counterpoint, by the way, to sort of this being a sort of a major top, although it could be, is if you look at the monthly RSI, it's nowhere near, right? It's nowhere near that level, right? That's just for the same drawing that I just had on the chart, right? It's nowhere near that level. You didn't actually go all the way to the top. And it's actually cooled off quite a bit. In 2013, this drop here was basically just back down to 70, and then it went right back up. Right now, it's all the way back down to 58 on the monthly RSI. So again, it depends on the way you look at it, but I keep spending so much time like trying to figure out, like, it's like a puzzle, trying to figure out the puzzle pieces. How's this thing going to play out? And I think at this point, there's parts of it that seem 2019-esque to me, but that's also, to some degree, I think it's some recency bias. That's just what happened last cycle, so it's fresher in my mind than what happened in 2013 and what happened in 2016. So I also go back to those and I see, all right, again, if it's not 2019, then I think Bitcoin needs to prove it this month. Okay? If it gets back above the 200-day SMA, and if it gets back above the bull market support band before this month is over, which, I mean, I shouldn't limit it to this month specifically, but you wouldn't expect it to spend too much time below it, right? Again, 2013, 2016, we did not spend that much time below it. So you would not expect Bitcoin to spend that much time at these prices if it's just 2013 or 2016 or 2017 or 2021. If it's 2019, then you would expect longer times at these prices, right? You would expect a little bit longer time at these prices, and for it to slowly bleed in. I think one of the reasons why I go back to that is if you look at like altcoins like Total 3, so to some degree this does to me. I mean, the altcoin market does kind of look like 2019, right? Where you have this rally that goes up a lot, pretty high, and then you slowly bleed back down to the bull market support band. You hesitate around there for a little bit, and then you go even lower. And it kind of looks like that's kind of just what just happened, right? You hesitate there for a little bit, and then you go even lower. So I still think that there's some evidence to suggest that it's similar to 2019, but I want to remain open-minded. You know, I feel like there have been times in the past where I wasn't as open-minded, and then I got my face ripped off, by a rally. So, like, I'll just say, it's more of like an if-then statement. If Bitcoin can reclaim the bull market support band and the 200-day SMA, especially before Q4, then the odds of a Q4 rally go up. If it can't, and it just does what it did in 2019, then the odds of a Q4 rally go down, and you might just see a Q4 bleed into the end of the year, maybe on the back of an uninverted yield curve, right? I mean, that would probably scare the market into a Q4 bleed rather than a Q4 rally if you get some type of an uninverted yield curve. So I think that's kind of where we stand right now in the market. And I just wanted to provide an update on Bitcoin and the bull market support band, and really just talk about all these things. So let's see where Bitcoin goes this week, and what happens. But you can see, I mean, you're kind of living it out right now. One of the things we've been talking about, how the slightest sneeze by Bitcoin and a lot of these alts just are not even that far off their lows. I mean, like, look at ADA, and this was that 2019 comparison to ADA. You see how similar this ADA USD move is. You see that it's like identical. And look at like DOT. I mean, a lot of them are just back near their lows. Look at Avalanche, right? It's just bleeding back down. Look at Matic. I mean, a lot of these alts that were so loved last cycle are closer to their lows than their highs. So imagine a scenario where Bitcoin goes to 40K, right? Imagine that if Bitcoin were at 40K. Then you have a lot of these alts are at new lows, right? I mean, like, again, ADA is at 34 cents right now. Its low was 23 cents or something. So if Bitcoin were to drop to 40K, I mean, how do these alts not put in new lows? That's why Bitcoin has been the better play. But we knew that Bitcoin was the better play because of where we are in the business cycle. Higher rates, QT, doesn't mean you can't have a bull market, but it's a bull market where the lower risk assets outperform. How many times have you heard people say where, ETH is holding up well or alts are holding up well? You can say what you want about them, but they're still down a lot against Bitcoin over the last several years. So, I look at this and I'm like, well, if Bitcoin were to drop back down here, a lot of alts are going to put in new lows. If it rallies back up, Bitcoin dominance is still going up either way, more than likely. So that's where I stand. That's my update to the bull market support band. Let's see what happens over the next couple of weeks. If you're in 2013 camp, 2016, 2017, 2021 camp, where you rally in Q4, you really want to see Bitcoin get back above the bull market support band before Q4. If you're in the 2019 camp and you think this is playing out like 2019, then you would expect us to just kind of hang around here for a little while, right? I don't know. I think I'm biased towards the 2019 view because that's what happened more recently. I would say I'm kind of like 70-30. Maybe that's the way I'm saying. I'm like 70-30 right now. If we get back above the 200-day SMA and start holding out support, I might go to 50-50. But we'll see. That'll wrap it up for the video. Thank you guys for tuning in. Make sure you subscribe to Into the Cryptoverse Premium. We do have the sale. Links in the description below. We have the risk levels for a lot of different cryptocurrencies. And again, while we talk about all this stuff on shorter term time frames, guys, I just get into the market at low risk levels and get out of the market at high risk levels. That's about it. Thank you guys for tuning in. I'll see you next time. Bye.